Hello. Our goal for today is to create a presentation of sorts. It's going to consist of 3 different chapters. The first one is going to have some kind of 3D object which reacts to us pressing a button. Another one is going to be a short movie clip which automatically plays. And yet the third one is going to be your typical slideshow. So it's a very simple basic setup, but it's going to allow us to learn a whole bunch of very useful techniques, how to work with different media, and also quite a bunch of coding techniques which are going to be very, very useful later on. So let's just start. So let's make a presentation, shall we? We're gonna start with an empty project. So this is the first thing that you're going to see when you open Unity. And what we're going to need for today is a package that I prepared for you, which is right here. There are different things in it. There is some sound file, some font, some pictures, a video clip, and a 3D object. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take all of this and drag and drop it into my Unity editor, into my assets folder, like so. It's going to take a little bit to process that. There we go. So we have all these different media formats, and what we're going to do today is really learning how to use this different media and how to use Unity in order to manage them essentially for us. And we're going to take a tiny little bit, we're going to investigate a little bit of the coding part of things. So let's just start with something. In most of cases, you can actually just drag and drop your files, your data into Unity hierarchy, into your scenes hierarchy. So I'm just going to start with the 3D object that I have here, which is, by the way, all of this somehow Villas-Savoie related, right? So it's going to be our topic. Let's take this 3D object here and drag and drop it into a hierarchy here. So something shows up on the screen. This is our game preview in the scene view. If we scroll out, it's also visible. There's a villa. So I assume it's just simply very big. I'm going to scale it down. There we go. And perhaps move it slightly to the side. I can do it either here by going to the inspector and essentially messing around with these numbers here, or I could actually just go to the scene, and if I'm far away from an object which is selected and I press F, I'm just gonna focus on this object, I can move it around just like so. Anyhow, I'm just gonna position it right here. Another thing that I perhaps wanted to do is I'm gonna change the background. So I'm gonna select main camera, and in its inspector, instead of the skybox here, which you can see is selected, I'm going to have a solid color rather, and adjust it to something like this. There we go. Okay, so there's our basic scene. Perhaps I'm going to save it because I like it already. I'm I'm going to go into my scenes folder. I'm going to call it 3D SCN, just like so. And now let's just play with this. So maybe that's the right moment to introduce a tiny little bit of coding. So I'm going to go into my assets field down here and right click and create a C# script. And I'm gonna call it do something. Enter. So as you can see, it just appears as one of those many different files. It's just one of the things that we can make weave into our application or our game. So if I double click here, it's going to automatically open a code editor that is associated. By default, it's Visual Studio. Perhaps we're going to change it later on, but for now, that's what we have. So what you can see is our basic code structure. You can see that's our name, and it happens to be a public class. We don't know what that is, but we don't care. It has these two fields right there, and it's two basic functions. Void means it's a function, it's a routine. And so what that means is whenever this code is executed, it's going to first go into here in between these brackets and run everything that sits here once at the start of your application. And then it's going to go here immediately and run whatever is inside here as quickly as it can. Right? So we have that covered. I'm going to go back to the editor and figure out what is it exactly that I want this thing to do. So, well, perhaps what I want to do is I want to manipulate the transform of this object here. So perhaps I want to just do something with rotation. So, instead of doing this by hand, I want to do this automatically. I want my script to do it for me, right? So there is something about transform and rotation. So I'm going to go into the script and go into the update and start typing transform. Okay, it auto-completes for me. So it tries to guess what is it that I might mean if I start typing some comments. So transform dot. Okay, rotate. I can choose a function of the transform. And now if I open parentheses, which is where you would typically type in values for a particular function, it gives me these different possibilities, 1 of 6. So I can do it by providing a vector, or a vector and some number, or just 3 numbers. Maybe that's a good starting point for us. So let's just put in some numbers. I'm gonna say 0f, 0f, let's say 0.2f, and close this line by a semicolon. It's very important. Every line of code ends with a semicolon. That essentially means, okay, well, that's what we mean. That's the comment. So it says transform, rotate for x-axis 0, for y-axis 0, for z-axis 0.2, and do it all the time while you're updating. Let's try to use this code now. I'm gonna save and go back to my editor. Unity updates the code, And now if I take this and just drag and drop onto the 3D object that I have here, it should work. So let's test it. I'm going to play the game. And voila. So our first code is working. Wonderful. So let's dig a little bit further. There are a couple of useful things that we might learn on the way, and I think this is a good moment for it, so that we're not afraid of messing around with codes later on. So let's introduce the concept of variable. Variable is a very useful idea here in coding. Essentially what it means is that anything can be replaced by a name for it. So to give you a practical example, we're trying to rotate something by some number, and it's a fixed number, right? Well, we could replace this number by a name. Let's say how much. All right, it's a name. Now, the trouble is, and this is what Unity tells us here, it gives us a red underscore and says that the name how much does not exist in the current context. Yes, we need to define what do we mean by this so that it's clear what do we understand under such name. So our context is this. So we want to specify for this chunk of code, what does it mean how much? And what I want it to be is a number of a type float. Just for your information, in coding, you would typically encounter different types of variables for numbers. Floats are the numbers with a comma, so 0.5, pi, and so on and so forth. To a certain precision. If you want more precision, you have a double. If you don't need a comma, you have integer. We can look into this at a certain point. For now, let's just say it's a float. And then we're going to say how much. Notice that the underscore disappears. So from now on, Unity knows that under how much it should understand a float. And now we can actually assign something to it. We can say it is 0.2.f semicolon. So instead of putting the number here, we just put some words here, like a name, and then we define that name to be of this type and to have this value. So this is our definition, and we're using it here. There are many benefits of doing such a thing, and we're going to discover them little by little in this tutorial series. For now, let's just be happy that we managed to create our first variable. So let's see if it works. I'm going to save this. And of course it works. It does exactly the same thing. Obviously. Now, notice that our Villa Savoie here has all these different properties which are visible in the inspector. And one thing among this is the do something script, right? We can enable it and disable it. Let's go back to the script and make a little tweak. If before this declaration we're going to add that it is a public type of variable, something important is going to change. I'm going to save this and go back to the editor. Notice here that our do something script now has a public, so available for editing, variable, which is called how much, and we can adjust it like any other number, which is wonderful because this allows us to tweak certain parameters that we want to be tweakable without necessarily going into the coding. So right now we gave it some high number. It's going to behave slightly differently, and we can change this according to taste, right? Wonderful. So maybe let's continue with this so that we understand a little bit more about what's going on here. What I want to do is I want to create a little interaction. The kind of interaction that would allow a user to take some action while in the game and to observe effects of this action. So let's start with basic user interface element. It's going to be a button. There we go, here's a button. We can of course position the button wherever we want, just like so. Or if you want, we can go to the scene view, zoom out, perhaps press on the button to press F. There we go. And we can position it somewhere, just like so. Or, which is very useful, we can also lock it to some place here. So maybe let's just go here, press Alt, and lock it to maybe top. That's fine. And then adjust a tiny little bit the offset from the top, like so. Okay, so there's the button, and the button is consists out of the shape with an interaction that is assigned to it and a whole bunch of other things, but also it has a text. We can change the text if you want to, however we want. But for now, we're not going to use it, so I'm just going to disable it. Okay, we have this button here. So what we want to do is to create a situation where whenever we press the button, something happens to the villa. And perhaps one simple thing that we can do is to change its scale. How about that? So we're going to manipulate these numbers in some way. I'm going to go to the code. And now I'm going to create my own function. And I want this function to be public. I'm going to call this function scale me. Okay, so what is going to happen here, well, needs to address the transform and the scale in some way. So I'm going to type in transform dot scale. Is there anything like this? Okay, there is a local scale. Fine. I'm just going to try to manipulate that. Local scale. What can we do here? Right. So the way to do that is slightly different than by addressing this by a command like this. You see it's highlighted in yellow. This one is not. Here we need to assign a vector which is describing the new scale. So let's say 0.8, 0.9, 0.3. Okay, let's just make sure it's a float. So we have a function called scale me, and whenever this function is called, the object should be scaled by this vector. I'm going to save this and now try to use this function from my game. So I'm going to go to the button, scroll down, and down here there is a field which assigns actions to the button whenever the button is clicked. So I'm going to, right now the list is empty, I'm going to click the plus, and we can drop here the object we want to interact with. Well, the object we want to interact with is the villa, because the script that we want to use sits on the villa. So I'm going to take the villa, drag it here, and then I can choose a function. Okay, there's different possibilities here, but one of them is do something, which is my script. And as you can see, scale me is available for us. So I'm going to use this. Let's see what happens if we run the game. All right, the villa is rotating. If I press this, it scales. Well, but that's it. Because we assign the vector that we created here, and that's the only thing that it's doing. Good. Let's try to use the concept of variable in a little bit more sophisticated way now. So here we are creating a new vector, but it has fixed numbers. So for all the three scaling factors, perhaps we could generate some random numbers here instead of fixed ones. Why not? So let's use what we learned and declare this time locally, so only for this particular function, so not globally outside of every function, but only locally, some variables. Float scale x is going to be let's say random range from 0.1f to 1.5f. How about that? And I'm going to do this for all the three axes. So as x, as y, and as z. Of course, these are absolutely arbitrary. I just invented them, right? Essentially what I'm saying is that from now on, from here, under this name, I'm going to understand something that is a float, and I'm going to assign it some kind of value, right? So now I'm going to take these names and feed it into our function. Okay, save this. I think that should work. Let's try it. All right, no errors so far. Oh, wonderful. So every time we press the button, we're going to scale the villa differently, and also differently according to each axis, which is great because it kind of generates some sort of funny mutations of the villa. That's pretty cool. Okay, wonderful. So let's stop here and perhaps look at this again. Here's our code, right? So what we learned so far is that we can replace fixed numbers like that with some names like this one. But in order to do that, we have to declare them like so. And we can declare variables as well as functions to be public, which means that they can be accessed from outside of this context. We also learned that things which are placed here are automatically repeated every frame of our however fast our computer can refresh. And then we can also create our own custom functions. In order to do that, we just create an arbitrary name. We type in void before that, and if we want it to be available in other contexts, we say public. And then after parentheses, which in this case are empty, but we could actually type in something here, and we're going to learn this in the later part of this video. We have curly brackets which describe the content of the function, so it starts here and ends here, and whatever is the content is going to be executed only when we call this function. And this is precisely what we're doing with this button, right? We're interacting with an object which holds the script, and we're calling the scale_me function. Wonderful. Okay, so enough of scripting for a moment. Let's go into some graphics now. The problem with our button right now is that it's very boring. So perhaps what we want to do is to customize it a little bit. And I prepared a little graphical element here. So what I want to do is I want to replace the image on the button, which is some kind of standard square, with my own image. I'm going to try to drag and drop it here. Well, I cannot do it. The reason for that is that I need to manipulate this data before I can use it in that situation. So I'm going to click on it in my assets folder, and in the inspector I have all these different properties. I'm going to change the texture type here at the top from default to sprite. I'm not going to explain right now what it all means. I'm just going to scroll down and apply. So from now on, I can use it for my user interface elements, like a button. So I'm going to go back to the button, drag and drop it right there. It looks a little squashed, so perhaps I'm going to adjust the dimensions of the button so that it kind of looks better. So button, transform here, maybe let's make it 200 by 200. That's pretty okay. And maybe let's just position it again. Oops, sorry. Let's position it again somewhere central. And just about here. And here. Whatever. So what that means is that we can have any shape for our button, which is really, really great. Let's play this thing. So the wheel is rotating because the script is working. And if we press here, we can change it. Great. Okay. Perhaps the last thing that I want to do here is to add some sound. I prepared a little file for you. I'm just going to drag and drop it into my scene. And there you go. We have an audio clip. And by default, the settings are such that it's going to play on awake. So if I press play, I can hear the audio. Okay, that's great. That's great. Wonderful. So let's just say that this scene is finished. We're happy with it. And let's move on. I'm going to save it and simply start creating another one because we want a presentation, and this presentation is going to consist of different media formats. It's going to have a 3D object, it's going to have some images, a movie. So let's make another scene. New scene, basic. There we go. This scene is going to be very, very simple. The only thing I'm going to do here is adjust my camera so that it's not so annoying, and drag and drop the movie into here, like so. It doesn't show up yet, but if we press play, it should automatically be launched, which is fantastic. So there are different properties here, as you know, for every object in the inspector, you're going to have all these different properties, and of course you can play with this, you know, playback speed, you can loop it, you can do many different things. You can of course adjust the transparency of this and do a whole bunch of other things. We're not going to cover this. The purpose of right now, the purpose of this tutorial is to create a presentation that deals with different media formats. So we're just going to assume that this scene is just done. Yeah, it has a movie in it and it's just looping. And it's a short clip, like so. Now, the problem is, I'm going to first of all save this. So I'm gonna go and save as, let's say, clip SCN. Perfect. So now I have the movie thing and I have the 3D thing. How do I transition between the two? That's something that we want to learn just right now. Okay, well, let's say I'm here in the 3D scene, and perhaps what I want to do is I want to create another button which is going to allow me to move to the next scene. Let's try to do that. I'm going to go to the game object, UI, button, and maybe adjust the size of it like so, and perhaps also get rid of the text and immediately replace the boring square with my nice graphics here. So again, I'm gonna press here, change into a sprite and apply. Go to this button, drag and drop it instead of its image and perhaps position it somewhere right here. Why not? So now, save this. We have a button. We would need to create a code that teleports us from this scene to the other. That's going to be a little bit complex, but let's just go for it. So I'm going to right click here and create another C# script. Let's say called change scene. There we go. I'm going to open this code. And we start again with fresh, empty code structure. So first thing we need to do if we want to use this functionality of moving between the scenes is using Unity engine dot scene there we go, scene management. And what that means is that we're requesting to use some bigger chunk of code that sits somewhere in the background, and we just want to use this functionality. And then inside here, inside of our class, I'm just gonna throw away all this content. We don't need it. I'm just gonna leave both parentheses. Whenever you have an open one, you have to have a closed one. And I'm going to create a public void, which is a public function, change scene, change scene to parentheses, curly brackets, and inside here I need to call the scene manager and its function load scene, and here I need to type in which scene I want to load. Now we're gonna use a little trick. So of course I could type in here a name of a particular scene, either this one or that one, but that's relatively stupid, because that would mean that whenever I want to use the same kind of functionality, I would need to create a different code. So we just learned the concept of variable. Let's use it here as well. So instead of typing a name of a scene here, I'm going to create some kind of variable name. Let's say which one? How about this one? And of course this is undefined, so Unity doesn't understand what do I mean by this, but we're going to define it inside of this parenthesis, and that's the little trick. I'm going to say string which one. So now you can see that they're matching, name is identical, and unlike defining a variable somewhere outside of a function, here it only is meaningful for this particular use, and what matters as well is that now this function is going to expect something from us. This might sound mysterious, but if we save this and go back to the editor, you're going to see exactly what I mean very soon. So now I want to have some kind of object to put the script on so that I'm not confused. So I'm just gonna create an empty script holder. It's my name for it. It's of course arbitrary. What matters is that it's an empty object which doesn't disturb anything. It just sits somewhere, and I can drag and drop things onto it. So that's what I'm doing right now. No, I don't want to rotate it or anything. I want to change the scene with it. There we go. Change scene script. Okay, wonderful. Now I'm gonna save this, and now I'm going to go to the button. It's a little annoying. I have two things which are called button, and I'm constantly confused which is which. So I'm gonna call this one house button, and I'm gonna call this one change scene button, something like this. Now it's a little less confusing. So change scene button, I'm gonna scroll down, and on click I'm gonna try to interact with the script holder, and more specifically with the script that sits on it, which is change scene, and particularly with the function which is called change scene to. Look what happens here. Suddenly a window opens where I can type in the name of the scene I want to go to. So if we're here, we probably want to go to the clip scene. So I'm gonna scroll down here and type in clip scn. All right, that should actually do the job. I'm gonna save and try to play. This works. And this works too. What's important, and perhaps it might not work for you, I'm gonna revert back to the state that you might be in. Build settings. You probably have something like this. And whenever you try to switch between the scenes from here, you're gonna have an error message down there, which is great because it's good to learn how Unity communicates mistakes to us. So essentially it says scene clip scn could not be loaded because it has not been added to the build settings. So let's go to the build settings and add it. Build settings, add open scenes, this one, and also the clip scene, add it. Okay, they're both in now. So if we go back here, play, perfect. Now let's try to do the same so that we're able to go back and forth, because here we're just, you know, looping. So clip scene, I'm going to create a UI button, same size as the other one, like so. Similarly, disable the text, and I'm gonna give it this nice little arrow here. This time I'm going to lock it to the other corner right there, and perhaps flip it by 180. Okay, so I have a button. Now I want a script holder again, so an empty, right? And I'm going to drag and drop change scene script on it. It says there. And then I'm going to ask the button right here to interact with this object, namely with the change scene to function. And here I'm gonna type in 3D SCN and save everything. Let's see if this works. Yep. So we can go both ways. Good. So let's say we're happy with this. The last thing we're gonna do is another scene, this time with images. Let's do this very quickly. Basic. All right, what I'm going to do here is simply change the background color into something like that. And then I'm going to create UI image right in the middle. Maybe a little bigger. And this image is going to have one of those objects on it. Remember to make sure that any image that you want to use is a sprite here, right? So when you click on it, you go up here and you just make sure that it's a sprite. If it's not, so it's a default, for example, you change it to sprite and you go down and apply. In my case, I did this before, so I can just drag and drop my image here. Good. So I have an image scene. Let's just save it. Okay. So maybe first a known element. So let's just create a situation where we can go in here and go back, right? So perhaps we can treat this 3D scene as like a central piece of our presentation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create, well, essentially I'm just gonna copy paste this change scene button, but this other one I'm gonna lock to the other side and rotate it 180 like so. And I'm going to change what it's doing by scrolling down and typing in here the image scene like so. Control save. And now not to forget, important thing, we created another scene, but it's not yet in build settings. I'm gonna go there. You see 3D scene clip. We need to add the image scene to the build settings. Only then we can use the functionality of moving between the scenes. Let's see if this works. Okay, we have the movie clip, we have rotating villa, and we have an image. Great. Let's go into here and make sure that we can come back. So game object UI button, and game object empty script. Oops. Like so. Change scene onto here. Button. Again, let's make it bigger. Let's dock it to a corner and replace the image with our arrow, and maybe get rid of the text. Perfect. That just works. So now button, scrolling down, adding interaction with the script holder. I'm repeating this, but it's good to understand how these things are done. And here I'm gonna go into 3D scene. Wonderful. Again, make sure that it works. Yep, it does. Good. So, last part of this is going to be about this image here. So what we want to learn to do is how to replace these images without changing scenes. Is that an option for us? That's going to be our last part of code for today, and let's enjoy it. So what we want to do, in fact, is you can see we have this image, which in fact is just like a little empty holder. You can change its different parameters, and then one of its input fields is the actual source image. And right now, one of the 3 is assigned here. What I want to do is to automatically do this, right? Okay, how do I do that? We have to create a script. Let's just call it next image. This editor behaves in a weird way. I'm gonna reload it. There we have it. So what we want from this particular piece of code is, first of all, to somehow store all the 3 images for us. So to have a reference to them at hand. Well, we learned the concept of variable, and we learned that we can make a public one. And in fact, as I said before, everything here can be replaced by a name. So there must be a variable for an image as well. Public image my picture. Nope. Something's missing. Oh, I see. Using Unity engine .ui, right? We're dealing with UI elements, and image is part of that bigger chunk of code. So from this moment on, under my pick, we're going to understand an image. I'm going to save this little piece of code, go back to the editor, and study how this thing works. So I'm going to go to the script holder, and besides change scene script, I'm going to drop also the next image on it. You see that now my pick is a variable, and I can drag and drop any image onto it. Can I? Nope, I can't. Aha, so perhaps I can do this. So I'm not dealing with images really, but with sprites, which are representations of them, like these ones. Yep, I can do that. That's wonderful. So Now what I want to do is I want to store many pictures here. And this is a very important concept in coding we want to learn, namely that a variable can store one thing, but it can also store many things. So by doing this, I indicate that we're going to have many items of this type under this name. Well, if it sounds weird, let me show you what it means. Control S, going back, it's going to reload. And now, under my pick, there is a list. Right now the list is 0, but if I say it's 3 objects, I can say 1, 2, 3. Okay, that's great. So I'm gonna save this. I like it. And now the question is, how can I interact through code with this here? So it's an image which holds some sprite, right? Okay, well, perhaps I can reference it as well as a variable. Let's try that. I'm going to say here public image my image. I'm saving this, going back here, going to my script, my image, it wants to interact with this one here. Okay, so I just dragged and dropped it into here. Fine. And now we're going to use the start function to do something a little magical. So every time the scene starts, we're going to load a different image. So we're going to say my image dot source. What's the, well, actually it's sprite. Sprite is my pick. And now we have to choose which one. Let's say for now, this is how you're using arrays. So this is a name for an array of sprites. We're declaring how big this array is by adding elements there in the editor. And here we're just saying we want a second element of this array. Note that arrays are indexed starting from 0. So if our array has 3 elements, that means that we can have first one, second one, third one. And if we type something above that, it's going to generate an error. So let's see if this works. Save. What should happen, take a look. Image S1 is currently assigned here to be displayed. If we press this, it should become a different one. Indeed, it changes to SO3, which happens to be the third element, so element with the index 2 of this array. That's perfect. Okay, so the last thing we're going to do is we're going to learn how to count. What we want to do is to treat this as a kind of button, so that whenever we press this, the image changes. So let's try to do that. And first thing we're going to do is we're going to adjust our next image code. Let's take a look. So what we want to do is we want to learn how to count. So let's create some kind of variable here, which is going to be called current, for example. And let's just say that current equals 0. And it's going to be, we're going to use it here instead of a fixed number. We're going to use this name here. But now, instead of having this sprite assignment happening in the start function, let's create another function. Public void change picture. Like so. And what we're going to do is precisely this. We're going to take this away from start, place it in the change picture function, and we're going to replace this fixed number by our variable, which is current, and we're going to say current plus plus. Right. So what that means is we're starting with current being 0, and that means that we're going to first load the picture 0, but immediately after that we're going to increase this number by 1. Plus plus is a shortcut, essentially meaning plus equals 1. It's the same. Let's see what this does. I'm going to save this. I'm going to go here. And now what I want is the interaction part, right? So what I want to be able to do is to click on the image, so treat it as a button. Let's try to do that. Let's go to the image, scroll down, and add a component. Button. There it is. So actually you can drop this kind of component on other things as well. So it's not that a button is necessarily a fixed thing. Many things can be buttons. Alright, so right now our image is a button. We can assign something to it on click. So we want the script holder and the next image change picture function. Let's see what happens when we run this. We start like this. Something is happening here. Index out of range. So it's a mistake. What we have to do is we have to make sure that our code folds back to the 0 after we run through all the images, because otherwise what we're trying to do here, if we keep on increasing this number, we're trying to load an image of the index 4, 5, and so on and so forth. Well, there is no such image because our array consists of 3 images at this moment. So we're generating an error. What we want to do is to fold back. So essentially, when we reach the maximum size of this array, we want to go back to 0. So after we learn how to count by adding 1, we're also going to learn how to make a conditional statement. We're going to say this: if current is smaller than my pick dot length, then increase current by 1. Else it is 0. Let's save this. What this should do is it should increase this integer variable by 1 only if we're not bigger than the length of this array. Let's save this and come back here and see if this works. Nope, still doesn't work. So let's try to adapt it. Oh, okay, so length is 3 while we're actually talking about indexes. So we want this. There we go. So now we're scrolling through all the images. And the beauty of it is if we want to have more images here, it's no problem at all. I'm going to give you an example. Right? So the code takes care of all the numbers being right for us. Okay, that's it for today. Let's just enjoy what we have created so far. We have this, we have that, and we have that. Perfect.